Y'all have a good trip. Roger that.
Slowly. Slowly wait for it.
30.
29.
28.
27.
26.
25. 24.
23. 22.
21.
20 seconds and counting.
19.
18.
17.
16. 15.
14.
13.
12.
11.
10 seconds.
6.
5.
4. And 3.
2.
1.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Trust No One, the X-Files podcast, where my fellow agents and I discuss episodes of the X-Files. Today, we're going to be talking about the 22nd episode of the first season, which originally aired on April 29th of 1994. Howard Gordon and Alex Ganza were the writers of the episode, and Gerald Freeman was its director. This episode got compared to Lazarus as well as a couple of others within the first season. Some positive ways, some negative ways. But when we talk about reincarnation, that's kind of the theme of this particular episode. Do we believe in reincarnation? We kind of go back and forth a little bit here about the evidence of reincarnation. What evidence is there? What do you guys think? Are we believers in reincarnation?
So I'm going to be, a bit cheesy and say I want to believe, because I really, really like the idea that this isn't the only shot I get at this life. I would quite fancy coming back as an animal, and I quite fancy coming back as maybe a slug or a snail, because I think they have quite a cool lifestyle. And I like the way that they leave sort of glittery trails wherever they go, and they communicate through their slime. And I think that might be easier sometimes than the old human life that we've got at the moment. So
I didn't know the slime thing. Huh.
Very cool. Snails and slugs, massively underrated, awesome animals. So in that sort of sense, yes, absolutely. I think there is compelling evidence. There's been all sorts of sort of studies and trials done, certainly in the kind of since the 60s onwards, and the sort of published evidence that I find quite compelling. But it depends, I guess, if we're thinking about it in terms of a soul thing, or if we're thinking about it in terms of could the spirit or disembodied past being from another transform or transfer into a new human. So it's a different thing depending on definition, I think. What do you think, Dan? Do you believe in it?
I think it's an interesting belief, but I don't personally believe in it.
Okay. I think, having grown up in the Catholic Church, it's been very instilled upon the followers that, this plane is not it. There's something after we pass away. I don't know if I necessarily believe in it in, the Catholic Church's vantage point, using that. But I have a hard time believing that this is it, that it's a one and done. What happens when we die? Are we just, to me, it doesn't make sense that it's like game over. Sorry, we're done. So it makes me wonder where we do go, how we get there. So I have zero evidence of that actually being reality. But I do have a difficult time believing that, once you pass, that's it. So I guess I'm with Agent Bennett on this one, as in I want to believe. So,
Well,
I
I
think
agree with that as well.
yeah.
I think within this episode, it's complex, isn't it? Because it almost feels to me like a possession rather than a reincarnation. Because once the ghost's job is done, and I know we'll get into, the whys and wheres with that later, but once that happens, he leaves her, right? And then she is a new being. She's like a fresh soul. So there's almost like two souls in there. And there's a bit of a discussion with the psychiatrist about schizophrenia and those kind of, personality sort of traits.
I think at one point the psychologist had mentioned there was like too much feeling for just one entity. So yeah, they had alluded to, like, I felt like it was multiple personality disorder or something like that. Agent Dan, you had started to talk. I think we cut you off there.
All I was saying was I agree with. I would like to believe, so I agree that it's a.
We all want to believe.
Nice,
All right. So I'm going to call her our main character, despite her not really speaking, having much of a speaking role, I guess. So the little girl, 8-year-old Michelle. As you watch the episode, you'll be able to, because if anybody hasn't watched the episode, I don't want to necessarily spoil it, but she is portrayed as, like Agent Bennett said, almost possessed by this soul or this being. So the way that they find her is at the very beginning of the episode. She's just kind of sitting in an alleyway on a box or some sort of, I don't remember what it was. And then they brought her into the police station where she just sat, and it was like almost catatonic. And throughout the episode, she had that look on her face, and there were times where she was screaming. Was she convincingly creepy for you? What are your thoughts? I felt like she was a decent actress. I think child actors can either really make the mark or just really break an episode. I felt like she did a decent job. What are your thoughts?
I think she was convincingly creepy, but for me, it was sort of like a double-edged sword because, like, in at least the final scene that she's in, I was noticing that she hardly blinks, and I was like, I wonder if that suggests, like, surely the guy who apparently reincarnated into her body blinked more than she does in those scenes. So, yeah, I was like, I found that a bit confusing.
Okay.
It
Agent
was,
Bennett?
yeah, it was definitely strange, wasn't it? I mean, I think she does a very good death stare. I mean,
Yes.
fantastic. And she's got presence, hasn't she? There's something about her that's very charismatic. And I'm glad they didn't go down the path of suddenly her voice distorting and becoming the voice of Charlie or anything weird like that. It was very much, she just seemed to be sort of channeling his energy through her. And did that quite convincingly. And it was almost, the character was almost created by the descriptions of what she did when we didn't see her, terrorizing nannies and getting on buses and transportation all over the city, with nobody apparently noticing that this kid had gone missing again. It was
Right.
almost like, well, what powers did she have that we didn't know and we didn't see? Yeah, I did think she was convincing. And I thought she was creepy in terms of her manipulation of the police. I thought that was really clever. The way that she initially kind of hooks the detective in and gets herself in the building and gets herself in the room with the one guy she wants to. I mean, that was, if she's been sitting there and waiting for that changeover and that detective to come on, it shows a huge depth of planning and conceit and everything else. So, yeah, I did think almost the lack of dialogue and just the intense staring and just occasional sort of movements of eyes. Yeah, it was a really convincingly creepy thing, definitely.
Yeah, I felt that she did a good job at putting the creepy out there, and like definitely you could see just by the way she would sit and stare that, hey, there's something going on up here. And we eventually come across what that is. So finding the little girl in the alley, she's brought inside into the room to find her parents. And the room that they go into goes past a trophy case that's holding a little memorial thing for Charlie Morris, who had been killed 9 years earlier. And there's a composite sketch that got put together, and the composite ends up matching Charlie Morris. And Scully explains this away by saying, look, she just walked past this case. She saw the photo. That's where it came from. And Mulder really isn't buying that story. So is Scully's rationalization there of this is where she saw it, this is where it came from, and that's why the little girl has this picture in her head, would that have been a reasonable explanation for you?
I think at that stage in the investigation, yes, because actually, the composite seems to be of somebody that nobody else had witnessed, nobody else had seen. It's a busy police station, it's unlikely someone could have just walked across there. At that point, they weren't thinking about ghosts or apparition. I mean, obviously Mulder was, bless him, but but apart from that, so it was a kind of, well, was there a detective just hanging around who looked like that? Well, the picture's there, but I suppose it's indicative of our desire to rationalize these sorts of experiences and just explain them away, and particularly with kids, actually, it's just like, oh, it's only a kid. She must have seen it somewhere, you know, and the fact that she couldn't be a reliable witness. I think Mulder picks the original detective up on that and said, well, did you get a description of the guy? And the detective's just like, what do you mean? There's no way there was a person in there. So
Right.
I think Scully, in a way, is very quick to explain it away using logic, in far more of a simplistic way than she normally does. Actually, the tension between the two, it was just a bit like, no, I'm the skeptic, you're the believer, and it was quite sort of like that. I felt with this.
Yeah, I don't feel like there was a lot of explanation there. I mean, it makes sense, but the way I was thinking about it was for her to just rationalize, oh, she saw the picture and that's what she went with. If you're just walking past something, I don't feel like, unless you have a photographic memory, that you're really going to have that image ingrained that well in your brain. So when you're giving a description later on, that it would be that spot on. Because in my head, realistically, you're walking past this, unless she stopped to stare at the picture, which I think they would have noticed. Like, yeah, she stopped there and she was looking. It doesn't make a ton of sense to me that that's where she would have seen it. I don't have a better scientific explanation, you know, other than, hey, she had this guy in her head because he's literally living in her. But I just felt like, yeah, it was a really easy way to rationalize where it came from. Agent Dan, what did you think?
Well, it's reminded me of like so often in cases where there's claims of reincarnation. Often the answers that skeptics give is that, oh, the person, you know, probably or must have read about that sort of situation and sort of half forgotten it, or, you know, come across it by some other means. So that was the explanation of the girl saw the picture, just reminded me of that.
Okay.
I think if we think about the idea that she has seen Charlie Morris's face, though, I mean, if you go down the idea of she is Charlie Morris or she is possessed by Charlie Morris, she's not actually face to face with him then, right? So did somehow Charlie Morris come out of her body and push and she saw this man? Or what? It struck me that it was quite an odd detail to report. Like, because, I mean, yes, of course you'd say maybe, oh, there was someone else in the room, but how did she actually visualize Charlie? It's quite an odd thing, and if you think about like the way that this is supposed to be explained, right?
Well, if they're each other, and that I know sounds weird, like if that is Charlie, like if I had to describe my face to somebody, I could do that without looking at it, you know? So if it was in fact him in that body, she would be able to describe that.
Yeah,
so I mean, that could be one way to explain it away.
I guess maybe a reflection in the window, like maybe she looked in the window and actually saw him and was like, there was a man, because she's very like, there was a man in the room. And she never speaks like, I was the man in the room or I am in the room, you know, it was only me. So it's just an interesting sort of shift, isn't it, I think?
Absolutely. So as we go through Mulder and Scully investigating various bits and pieces and leads that they do come across, one of the things that Mulder makes the suggestion of after speaking to, forget the doctor's name, but they refer to her as Sheila, is about going through and doing hypnosis with Michelle. And Mom does agree to do that. So what do we think is the significance of the hypnosis scene? Like, we know Mulder definitely buys into that. He had alluded to hypnosis before, past life regression. So we know that that's definitely his thing. But in this particular case, what weight does this hold?
So I thought it's interesting that not only is it potential evidence or not, based on your belief, I guess, but also that Mulder has like talked about, like Mulder did mention it in the pilot and stuff like that. So it connects them. They've got like the common bond of having been through hypnosis.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think because he knows or feels that he knows that it's opened up so many of his own memories, he's very committed to that as a sort of method and process. I mean, I am a believer in the power of hypnosis, and it's been quite interesting kind of over the years looking at sort of cases where it's been used and people have tried to use it as evidence in trials. And I mean, Scully says, no jury's going to listen to that, and she's right, they won't. But there's really interesting studies where they basically interview people that have been in car crashes, not fatal ones, but minor collisions or whatever. And what they can recall before hypnosis is maybe the color of that car or, some details. But under hypnosis, they can give you the number plate. They can give you all this other stuff, right? So there's this theory about like the way that memory is stored, and it's called cryptomnesia. And this idea that actually we store everything deep down. It's just that we don't have it readily accessible. So that's the theory of hypnosis, is that all it does is tap into that and open it up. I mean, it's a really frustrating moment for Mulder and for me as a viewer, actually, when that hypnosis process has stopped, because I'm like, oh, but in that moment of they're killing me. I mean, first of all, the person doing the hypnosis didn't do a great job, because first of all, when she said, I'm at home, where's home should have been the question, because they just presumed it was Michelle's home, right? Whereas if they described the home, it straight away would have, how would she know what Charlie's front room looks like? How would she know what the wife looks like? You would have gathered so much from even that stage before you start to get in. And the way it escalates so quickly into the trauma, into they're killing me bit, I get why they've done that dramatically, but I think the scene would it lost a bit of potency, because it could have been a much more significant scene, providing a lot more evidence, which would have really challenged Scully, I think, to try and explain away some of those things.
Yeah, I agree. I think that scene could have been executed better with just more details, the sequence in which they chose to kind of present the information. Even if they had gone through and got more information through the hypnosis, past life regression, and Agent Bennett, you had alluded to this, that is it going to hold up in court? Scully seemed pretty aggravated when Mulder said, we almost had it. And she's like, you will not be able to have an actionable case. And that's the term that they used.
Yeah.
To actually put this information out there and have a jury look at it or have a judge look at it and actually say, okay, yeah, this is something that we can use as fact. So my thought was, at any point, are we going to get to a point where we're going to think that this is actually something that is objective? Do we have something in the pipes, maybe with technology, that can start to prove that this kind of stuff is in fact real? I know there are people out there that feel that things like past life regression are just, they say a bunch of hooey. And they certainly don't buy into it. But then you have, like you said, you've seen studies and read the documents on them about the relevant information that comes up from them. So do we think at any point that evidence that may or may not be out there could become objective? I mean, it goes back to that cliche. I want to believe. It'd be really cool if we could actually get to that point where we can say, okay, this actually has some base in science. Certainly not there right now, but do you guys think at some point we might get there where this stuff could be actually objective or considered objective?
I think at the moment, what tends to happen in cases of reincarnation and hypnosis is it's people from the past being reincarnated into the present, which makes sense, doesn't it? If we're talking about temporal kind of things being linear and things always moving forward. If there was a case, however, of somebody in the future being able to come back into and being reincarnated in the past, and they could give, these accounts of the future that then turned out to be true. I mean, I don't know how else you would explain that. I mean, the trouble with recalling things from the past is there's always this argument of, oh, well, they went and read this book, or they looked at this, or they, basically formulated a personality based on, 5 or 6 different historical figures, and there's records that you could do that for, particularly now, right? Everything's so there for the taking. But I think if somehow there was a case where somebody from the future kind of was reincarnated back and then told that version, then I think that would probably be, to me, absolutely irrefutable, but maybe even to far more skeptical people, genuine cause for investigation.
Okay.
I was thinking about hypnosis and buried memories, and not in the situation of necessarily reincarnation, but like in the case of multiple personality disorder, or what's now referred to as dissociative identity disorder, I'm thinking, well, that might be easier to prove than like a reincarnation situation with hypnosis.
Have any of you done like a past life regression or hypnosis? I've never had the
No.
opportunity. I would love to do it.
I would love to do it. I'd be so fascinated. Though I remember there was a magazine back in the 90s that mainly focused on UFOs and things, but it was talking about using hypnosis to basically interview people that had close encounters. And while under hypnosis, this person also started talking about, well, and of course, you know, I was Cleopatra in my former life, and start sort of and the rather skeptical interviewer was like, yeah, they're never just a dishwasher, are they? They're always like Cleopatra or a murderer who's come back for
Right.
vengeance, you know, something like that. So yeah, I think there's often a bit of sensationalism. But then if people were talking about having been a dishwasher from 100 years ago, it's probably not going to be an exciting thing, right? And kids talk about having imaginary friends. They talk about, I am this character, I am this person all the time, and we just discount it as childish fancy, I guess, or
Right.
imagination. So it would be very interesting to see kind of how that would shift, I think.
Yeah, it would be interesting if we actually put a little more credence to what kids will say. Because it's just, oh, it's an imaginary friend, or they're just making up stories. But
Mm,
I
I,
think there's a lot we don't know.
I was thinking about that actually in the context of multiple personality disorder or DID, because a lot like there is the question like nowadays there's a lot of people, even like qualified medical people that will say, oh, it doesn't actually exist. So
mm.
there's a whole debate about that as well, and I guess it figures into this episode as you were saying earlier that it seems like Michelle is a case of this.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There's a really fascinating study, and it was Dr. Ian Stevenson, I think, from the University of, I think maybe University of Virginia, and he did this massive project into like parapsychology, where he traveled all over the world and interviewed children who claimed to be someone else, who claimed to basically present evidence of reincarnation. And he said it always followed the same pattern. So you'd have these little kids who were just around age 1 or 2 just start behaving really, really strangely, like a different personality seemed to be kind of taking over in a way. And then normally when they first started speaking, speech was always delayed. And when they started speaking, they introduced themselves as this other person. And there was always a story about the death, and there was always a story about some trauma linked to the death. And they could give names and locations, and that's obviously their vocabulary, but they have vocabulary beyond their years, or archaic vocabulary that it was just implausible that they would have picked up from the people where they were around. And then these memories would peak between the ages of like 3 and 6, and then something would shift and it would sort of fade away. But I wonder if it's just, around the age of 6, you become so influenced by your peers and trying to just be normal and trying to, you can be creative, but that's play over there, And yeah, he said in all the cases that he looked at, the symptoms, or whatever you want to call them, had pretty much gone by 10. But his argument was that they hadn't gone at all. They'd just been repressed because it wasn't acceptable to express that anymore,
What's kind of interesting about the timeline that you're talking about with those cases, when you're looking at child development and development of the brain specifically, generally by the time a child gets to about the age of 5 or 6, the big growth spurts that happen in early childhood are ending at that point. It's actually, if you're familiar with like Freud and
Mm,
Piaget, you have the
mm.
latent period starting at about age 6. So it's interesting that, with those studies, they're seeing these ages, and that's right when the latency period is actually hitting. So
It's
just,
fascinating, isn't it?
yeah, just an interesting little
Mm.
connection there. So I was teaching that in my child, not obviously not reincarnation, but teaching development theorists in my child development
Next week,
class
isn't
that
it?
week. Trying to explain Freud in the most school appropriate way that I could when they're, talking about psychosexual analysis and all this. And I'm like, listen, guys, yeah,
It's a
get knocked up.
challenge.
Yeah, it's a little odd. So that I guess kind of lets us switch up gears a little bit here. Michelle was showing up in places For example, they said she lived in Orchard Park. She showed up in downtown Buffalo, New York. The places she was showing up were not very, very close to home. And when one of the officers was murdered, she was there. When another murder happened, she was on the bus. That there was an incident involving the bus that killed him. How was she getting there?
Hmm.
I mean, I don't know what public transportation is like where you guys are at, but in the United States, the bus systems can be tricky. They can be tricky for an adult, let alone an 8-year-old. And even then, like an 8-year-old doesn't have a bus card. How's she paying for this? So, I mean, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, is Charlie Morris just telling her where she needs to go? It would take a long time to walk, though. So I found that to be an interesting thing that wasn't addressed. How was she getting from point A to point B? What do you
I
guys
find
think
this
of that?
completely fascinating. So this whole idea that I think I referred to earlier of what she does off screen is far more interesting sometimes than what she does on screen. And like the fact that that very first murder, it's Barbala, isn't it, when he goes out the window, what happens in that room, and does she somehow, because of this possession reincarnation thing, have this excessive amount of just energy that means that she can literally throw him through the window and smash it? In that case, presumably she's got super strength and superhuman speed, and maybe she's just pegging it all over the city, like, let's go, like Flash style, like and then she's just on the bus so fast that no one even saw her,
Maybe. Yeah, I don't really have an explanation for it, and I think that's why that kind of popped into my head as a question. It's like, okay, this doesn't get explained. I don't know if we call it like a hole in this story. Maybe it's just one of those minute details that I got fixated on, and it was like, all right, wait a second. Agent Dan, you had an interesting look on your face a minute ago. What are your thoughts?
I don't know what that look was in reaction to, but I was thinking, yeah, like interesting theory about like her speeding, I guess, moving so quickly because she hurls that guy certainly out the window. And
Yeah, you
before
had
that,
the
I was
look.
thinking she's got both access buses that you mentioned and the telekinesis.
You had a look on your face like we were going off the rails there with our theories over here. Like, oh, good God, what did they just do?
I don't know what you mean.
Yeah, that was the look on your face there. I'm
know
like,
what you mean.
okay, you're like, he's either got something good or he's really concerned.
The therapy starts after the session. It's all
Yes,
fine.
we'll catch the first bill. When Mulder is at Michelle's home talking to mom, Michelle comes to a window and she throws down an origami hawk.
There's
And
a lot
later
of
on
things
in
coming
the
through windows.
did I say doors? Wait, what?
You said it comes through the window. There's a lot of things coming through windows.
Oh, well, yeah. Well, okay. So
Windows to
she's
the soul.
standing at the window that is open and she throws out an origami hawk and it kind of falls right at Mulder's feet. And, they're fawning over this creation and they ask, where did she learn how to do this? Mom's like, I don't know, kind of exasperated in that situation. And we later find out that Charlie Morris was utilizing a painting of, it was Noah's Ark, correct?
Yeah.
To create a set 222 of every animal. So, did you guys find a significance in that she had a hawk come down? Or, they just picked an animal? What were your thoughts on that significance?
I think this idea of, it depends which way you want to spin the metaphor, right? Because you've got this idea of like freedom and this idea of like a predator that can kind of spot its prey and come down and take it out, with great force and great precision, which is actually, what Charlie's doing through her. So that's quite interesting, I think. And just this idea actually of also, I think the little girl trapped within wanting to escape, that she is a little girl in there as well as Charlie. And there's something about, she lands it right in front of them, right? She's saying, look at this. And so it's either she's saying that or Charlie's saying that. And I think there's a bit of a struggle between the two of them in there, maybe, in terms of expression. So that could be a couple of different ways of thinking, I guess.
Yeah, I don't think I necessarily have an opinion, those kinds of thing. I tend to be more concrete. You're very good with like the more abstract thought processes, and that was just really beautifully said. And I think that that really makes a lot of sense.
Mm.
Agent Dan, did you have any thoughts on that?
Well, actually, just before Agent Bennett mentioned it, it occurred to me it's specifically a bird of prey, and then you talked about the bird being predator, and I thought, oh, that's exactly like what I was thinking of as well.
Mm. I think it's interesting as well because the final animal that's missing is a giraffe, right? Which, you know, is kind of this beautiful, kind of expressive, but hyper evolved being. And, you know, again, has this idea of standing above everything else and a different perspective and a different way of looking at things. And, you know, I think when that gets left on the doorstep for his ex-wife, you know, she then starts, I think, to believe. She's like, well, hang on a minute, there's some sort of connection here. And it's
Right.
interesting when she talks to Michelle in that final scene, she's like, just stop now. But I think she doesn't use his name, but I think she knows. I think she is talking to him, and he listens, doesn't he, once he sort of finishes his business. So yeah, I thought that was rather gorgeous, actually, that little moment on the doorstep with the giraffe. And it's like the set is complete. This is going to come to an end. I just need to finish off the unfinished business.
Yeah. Beautifully said.
Mm.
All right. So after the hypnosis session, Mulder was pretty fired up, saying that, you know, we're one step away from proving the pre-existence of the human soul. Mulder obviously has his beliefs, Scully has hers, and they're based in Catholicism. So Scully, being part of the Christian faith, why isn't she engaging more with this? Is that I kind of feel like in this case they really didn't write it well, but it was it's too paranormal for it to be church related. I kind of got that vibe from there. It's not a great explanation, but you know, when we were talking about earlier, the whole idea of Jesus dying on the cross and coming back, you know, you have that theme, and why wouldn't that be relevant for her in this particular case?
I do find this really strange that she doesn't even engage with that debate on that level. It's like, well, you know, you can have a soul with that. You can believe in the concept of soul without the concept of reincarnation, right? But that would have been a really interesting debate for them to have. And I think it would have enriched the episode so much. But she just seems to be really reduced, actually, in this episode, to just the slightly narky, annoyed skeptic, just going, "Oh, stop being so silly! Like it's obviously this." And it's almost like they've had a massive offstage fight, and this is like the bickering afterwards. I'm like, what's happened? Like the last episode we were watching was Tombs, right?
Right.
And she had the lovely banter, and then, you know, she rescues him at the end from the creepy guy under the escalator, like all that lovely stuff. And we felt they were really united and really one. And then suddenly here, they're just really snarky at each other. So I do find it really, really strange. And it is just almost like those sides of the debate have been completely shut down, I guess.
Yeah.
I thought that the title of the episode may have been given more relevance if her sort of Christian beliefs were brought into debate a bit more.
Yeah, so I think we can probably all agree that this maybe was a missed opportunity in this particular episode to have expanded and explored.
So many books and stuff I've noticed have noted that like this is the first time like they were going for like you see the episode, you see the madness through Mulder's eyes, so it's Mulder that writes up the notes, and like it's his voiceover at the end of the episode instead of Scully's as it usually would be.
Yep.
I wonder if there's this sort of idea that's being alluded to about kind of purgatory or like souls being unable to rest, because that's certainly a concept that I'm familiar with just from, you know, not that I have a massive understanding of Christianity, but this idea of, yeah, you can't quite shift on yet. And if you're in purgatory, does that mean that you've got the capacity still to affect things on earth? And, you know, I don't know what's blocking Scully in terms of why she's not really seeking an explanation, because she just seems to be shutting down but not offering any alternatives, you know?
Right. When I was a kid and, you know, you would talk about purgatory, you were basically stuck in this
Okay.
other world until you could finish whatever needed to be finished. And I think in this
Right.
particular case, Charlie Morris definitely had a bone to pick in his situation. And, we see that at the end of the episode, Charlie has presumably moved on.
Mm,
And you had mentioned the wife, Anita, saying, please, don't hurt him anymore. And I have to
mm.
wonder if I really felt like it was shady that another cop would marry the wife of a deceased coworker.
Oh yeah.
That wasn't really talked about, but I have to wonder how much anger was within Charlie slash Michelle for that situation. But I also felt like with that whole purgatory situation, when she's leaning over her then husband's body and looking at Michelle and saying, don't hurt him anymore. I'm wondering if Charlie actually saw that Anita was in a good place and she was happy. And that was a reason that he could let go. And it's
Mm,
like, okay, we'll leave it alone
mm,
because I can see that you have what you need. And, for some people, it's like, if not being with me is what you need to be happy, I'll give that to you. And I'm wondering if that was part of that, tying in with that whole purgatory thing. And, that released him from Michelle. So that's
yeah.
how I looked at that one. I know that's a little off topic there.
No, I think
Um,
that's a really good point.
sorry, my cat's doing her thing. But that kind of begs the question, if that is in fact Charlie in Michelle's body, why wait the 8 years to exact his revenge? Um, why let one live, the other can die before one of the others? Like, what do you think was the planning, or was it just really kind of right place, right time? Here he is. We're going to do it.
I don't know. I kind of went in circles on this because to begin with, it really annoyed me. I was like, why now? What is the point? It's not like this little girl is somehow at her peak of power at 9 years old, right? Like,
Right.
why choose that moment? And then I thought about the money, and I think there's a conversation between the two dodgy agents, dodgy police, and they're saying we said we'd wait 10 years. And
Ah,
I was like, oh, so is he saying like they've had this time, they could have, gone and confessed, whatever. I'm not having them cash in now. That's ridiculous. And if they cash in, they've actually got away with it. So I wondered if it was that. But again, it's just not really explained, is it, very much?
it's
There
not, but
was
I think
two.
that's a good theory there. Agent Dan?
There were two thoughts basically that went through my mind to do with this, and like even though you say like she's not at the peak of her powers at 9 years, well, I did think like at the age that she's at, she is stronger probably than she'd be at like 2 or 3, surely.
Yeah. Her doing really fast crawling would just be creepy with me.
Oh, good Lord.
And also, oh, I can't remember what that.
I'm sorry?
Oh yeah, the situation where like it has become an investigation by this time, and there's the danger that it may be discovered was actually happening. So I thought that
I
might
think
play into it.
I guess like I want to go back on my comment slightly where I talk about her not being at her peak of her power, because in a way, actually, at that stage in life, you can have quite a lot of power over adults. You can play the sort of vulnerable little kid, can't you? And be like, oh, I don't know,
Mhm.
save me, save me. You're not always assumed to be like conniving and plotting and evil at that stage either. Whereas I think teenagers are often kind of like maligned, aren't they? It's like they're responsible for what they're doing. Whereas at her age, I don't think anybody's really going to say, oh, yeah, she definitely pushed him out the way. I mean, it's just completely disregarded, isn't it? There's obviously no way she's done that. And there's no way she could have orchestrated anything else. So maybe her youth is a strength in a way because there's a perceived notion of innocence. And although the psychiatrists and people are working with her to understand her, nobody's saying, oh, she's an evil little girl, I mean, they've medicated her, which is a whole other kind of level, isn't it, of issue, which we can discuss in a bit. But yeah, maybe actually it's not it's not a bad age to sort of possess someone. That's a sentence I never thought I'd say. There we go.
I think
And I
she's
think there's
probably
that
got.
other element.
I think
There's
she's
the other
probably got
element of
loads of
like,
energy as well.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I guess the question of like, why does Fiore get to live and the other two are killed? I mean, my understanding was the other two were the one that actually murdered him, and Fiore knew about it and was witness or was present, or but kept saying that thing of, oh, you said you weren't going to hurt him, you said you were just going to scare him, or your cat, bless. So maybe it's that, but also I guess maybe there's that idea of, well, if Fiore's not left alive, who's going to confess? And it'll just be these 3 unexplained murders and justice won't actually be done, you know? So maybe there's that element too.
And, you know, with the idea of these murders and these things happen, you know, at one point they explain away how Charlie got killed. Like, oh, they were just looking for a cop to kill. But no, there was definitely a different situation that caused that. And, you know, it's not necessarily related directly to the series itself, but how do people do these things and
Oh,
live with themselves? I couldn't fathom. It blows me away to see these guys, you know, it was money, 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 money.
yeah.
And
It was that cold, wasn't it?
yeah,
It was
I mean,
just
and I
like,
get it.
oh.
The world's not sunshine and rainbows everywhere, but I don't know. That
I mean,
always blows me away.
I think it was a real comment on corruption within the police, though, wasn't it, as well? I mean, you know, we always talk about the dark agents and CSM and, you know, all the evil at the top, but actually it's the everyday, ordinary, corrupt police
In
who
plain
let
sight.
that
Yeah.
happen. Yeah, absolutely. And then just are there selling life insurance or whatever he was doing, you know, and just carrying on being a police, you know, and being a cop. And it's like, that's more terrifying than anything that Michelle and Charlie do, is that actually without what happens happening, they would have carried on and presumably taken any other opportunity to do the same again.
Right.
And the fact, like you said earlier, that he actually then goes and marries, you know, the wife of his
Yeah.
dead partner, who he knows is, you know, he's witnessed being killed. I mean, it's so morally corrupt and so
Yeah.
disturbing, you know, that it massively undermines faith in the police. And you know, those headlines that hit, certainly in the UK and I'm sure in the US as well, about police brutality or police corruption. I mean, I think one of the most important things about this episode actually is it exposes that, which is quite a significant thing.
And I think at least in the United States, when we talk about police brutality, I'm sure it's been something that's been around for quite some time. But I know within the last 10 to 20 years over here, it's really, really become, I don't know if it's because we have social media and we all have cameras when we have our phones with us, and we're able to disseminate this stuff out there to more people. But it's interesting that, again, they were kind of ahead of their time on this episode, the series, to kind of bring that in here in that situation. All right. As Mulder and Scully are doing their investigations, they show up at Fiore's house because they want to talk to him about what had happened. And he was really, really hesitant to talk to them. And as he started to talk to them, he's like, hey, it's Saturday, my wife's asleep. And then we find out when the wife comes to the door that she was baking because she had flour all over her hands. Why did he lie? And what was the pertinence to that? Why is this a relevant observation?
So I think it's I mean, it's just an indicator that he's a liar, right? I mean, you can I mean, in terms of like some of the performances in this, he was so dodgy, wasn't he? He turns up at the door and he's like, what are you doing? It was like paranoia, like face on, wasn't it? And it was like he was haunted by it in a way. He knew that actually probably they weren't going to get away with this on some level, I think. So the whole, oh, let's talk outside, my wife's asleep, that kind of thing. It was like, oh, you're obviously guilty of something, whether or not it's this. And then, yeah, I think just that little note of she's supposed to be asleep, but actually she's got baking flour in her hands. It just confirms he's a liar, basically, doesn't it? But Scully really gets quite excited about that, I think. And I'm like, that's you're so, you're just after these sort of bits you can actually pin down. Well, that's true and that's not true. Yeah, so I guess it's like food for the skeptic at that point, I suppose, isn't it? That there might be an alternative explanation and another more physical kind of real crime on the go, which of course there is. So
Yeah, I thought when you see her come out and do the thing with the hands that, okay, obviously he lied. And in an investigation, he is going to do what he needs to protect himself. So it's not justification for why he lied, but he lied. And then I'm thinking, as you watch the episode, Anita doesn't have any idea what actually went down. So I don't necessarily feel that it was protection to keep her away from it. I mean, I would hope that a husband would want to protect his wife from a bad situation, bad feelings, rehashing the past. But I really think that the motive there was, you've got somebody that has a very guilty conscience, and he doesn't want her to find out. And that's why, oh, she's sleeping. We need to be quiet because I don't want her to come down here and find out the crap that I did. But it was a good observation, I think, for the agents to see. And then I think as a viewer, it made me think for sure. Agent Dan, did you have anything with that to add?
I agree with your suggestion or speculation that he doesn't want her to find out what's happened, and that's why he lies. But yeah, watching the scene, I thought like Scully noting it came off as quite sort of petty, especially at that point in the episode, because you don't know like the ins and outs of what's actually happening.
Right.
Yeah, it sort of felt like, don't worry, I found some real evidence, Mulder. I'm going to follow that now, And he sort of snarkily said, so you go off and do your autopsy. That's your stuff, doesn't it?
Right. Right. So what do you think was going on there between the two of them? We've talked about how previously they were very cohesive as a team, and now it's kind of like a 180. What do you guys think about how that was written, their interactions with one another? What was going on there?
I wonder if there's just a bit of like, he finally thinks that he might know exactly what's going on, and he comes to that conclusion really quickly, doesn't he? He's like, oh, it's this is where we're at, like this is obviously the trail. And because it's so ingrained within him, with his own experiences of hypnosis, and also if we think back through this first season, we've had examples of this stuff before, so he's almost, I think, maybe at the point of frustration of like, with everything you've seen, how are you not willing to believe that potentially this is what's going on? And she just seems really cold and really dismissive, and like almost like somehow, the background pressure that they have received from Skinner and CSM and things, it's almost getting to her. And she's like, actually, no, there was a real crime here. Let me investigate this real crime, with your mad hypnosis and your mad telekinesis and whatever else. Maybe that's not what's going on. And maybe she feels that he's not listening to her enough, and vice versa. So they've got this friction on the go. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, after 9 years of, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. No, go ahead.
I think it's interesting that you both have said that like the reincarnation elements has like come up in previous episodes. I agree with you. Like when you talked about Lazarus, I would say that's an example. For example, I thought it was interesting that Howard Gordon himself, the co-writer of this episode, said the idea of reincarnation had been done yet prior to Born Again.
Oh. It was,
yeah, and episode maybe based.
Yeah, and it's weird how we kind of connect other things to that topic. I use the phrase "the same thing, only different." But yeah, it's certainly a valid point. I was going to say that in terms of their demeanor towards one another, that with this case, Scully does things that scientific way. Charlie Morris was murdered 9 years ago in the episode, and it's like, okay, in 9 years they still didn't figure out a concrete reason of what actually happened here, and it's police officers investigating one of their own. So I don't know if Scully was sticking to just the facts to try to. I don't think it's an issue of, hey, I want to impress somebody, but hey, we need to get this solved, and it's the police. We've got to do this by the book. So I don't know if that's where that came from. If it was, it certainly wasn't really illustrated in the episode. I think that was left very, very open-ended, in my opinion.
Definitely. I think the interaction, I don't think we've talked about this yet actually, with the dolls, where so Scully says, oh, this is what happens to the body. It was the chainsaw on the arm, quite gory stuff, and the gouging of the eye and things. And Mulder's like, this is the dolls, and she does shut up at that point. She's like, okay, that is weird, basically. Like, there is clearly something there. But she's almost, I don't think, like you say, like feels like it's a distraction, and feels like, well, where are we going to get to with this little girl and her ripping apart dolls? That's not going to help us solve this, and the evidence isn't going to stand up and everything else. And I think she is really horrified by what has happened and what is continuing to happen. And it's almost like she can smell like the stench of corruption, and she's determined to kind of root it out. And she's more interested in getting a prosecution here than she, and they do ultimately. I mean, justice is done, isn't it? They're 2 dead and 1 sent away to prison, and the little girl gets to be a little girl again. So yeah, in a way, it needs both of them to do what they do. It's just a shame there's so much friction and antagonism between the two, because this whole thing of you have to be a rational skeptic or you have to be a complete believer, I think you can be both. I think you need both within your own mind and within society in order to make progress and actually solve some of the biggest problems.
And I think both the main characters, Mulder and Scully, are believers and skeptics at various points of the X-Files.
Yeah, I think, like Agent Bennett said, you need to have some middle ground. You can't really be one extreme or the other, because you're going to miss everything in the middle. So having a perspective that's somewhere in between is definitely, I think, a positive thing.
It does surprise me that neither of them seems to be very empathetic towards Michelle, actually, where we've had obviously Eve, haven't we, with the 2 really scary little girls. And they were quite parental towards them in a way, weren't they? And sort of caring for them and looking after them. And, Michelle's mother had become very detached. I mean, the father had gone, this little girl going through nannies after nannies, clearly no friends, clearly nothing. And you would think, wouldn't somebody, one of them, Mulder or Scully, try and get somewhere? And Mulder does a little bit when they're doing the composite sketch, doesn't he, with the moustaches and things? But even then, he's just like, oh, I can study her, I can prove my theories with her. I mean, it was quite disturbing to see that side of him actually being quite callous towards this child.
Yeah.
I don't agree. I thought he was quite jokey with her.
I think he was at the beginning. I think as things kind of transpired, he kind of looked at her like a piece of evidence almost.
But when they're doing the the image stuff with the moustache, that's
yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
I thought that was a really sweet moment. Yeah. I thought. Towards the end of the episode, or at the end of the episode, I guess I should say, we hear Mulder's field notes, and this is the first time that he's speaking directly to the audience in the episode. What does this contribute? Mulder has concluded that this case is unexplained, but it was closed, correct? The case was closed but unexplained. What do we get in the episode from that particular block of speech with Mulder actually addressing the audience? Was that the first time he talked at the end? Because it's been Scully up to this point, correct?
Yeah.
Any significance there?
I thought that was a really good change, actually, a really significant moment, because I think in this case, I mean, both of them were right, but I think he is absolutely right in everything that he says and does, and his commitment to that belief, despite being challenged, in really quite aggressive ways by Scully and everyone else around him. It's like we need to understand the journey that he's on, and we need to be on his side a little bit in this one, so that we can really connect with the way that he investigates, which outwardly you can look at some of the things he says and does, and they do feel a bit spooky or a bit weird or a bit kind of like, how have you made that assumption? But we know from his field notes that he's a methodical, insightful, investigator. He's not somebody who's completely deranged or paranoid or whatever. So I like that we get that sort of tempering of what looks like quite, driven, potentially even callous behavior is underpinned with yes, and this, and this. And the fact that he says in the end, I don't know, it is unexplained, that he hasn't got every single answer, but that's why he needs to keep looking, I think.
Agent Dan, anything to add there?
But I thought it was just like a way of the writers mixing things up a bit, because it's so often Scully. But yeah, just bringing a bit more variety into the show. So it could be either of them. But also, like, I thought the scene prior to that one, where basically you see Michelle and she seems possessed, and then I thought that was really interesting because, like, the very end of the possession seems to be the breaking of the fish tank. I wonder if that was like anything to do with the possession.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if like the significance of that is like that was Charlie's fish tank, and Charlie's moving on and he's taking his stuff with him.
Yeah. There was a weird bit. So the fish tank breaks, the diver's on the floor, but there's a gun.
Mm-hmm.
Did I miss something? Whose gun is that?
When Fiore came downstairs and told Anita to stay upstairs, he had a gun, and Michelle knocked it out of his hand somehow. I forget how it was done, but then it like slid to her feet.
Got it. Okay. And then she turns and walks away because obviously she's got the choice to kill him at that point, hasn't she? And she's like, no, I'm going to leave it. That makes sense. I had a bit of a moment where I was like, there's a gun in the fish tank. What's actually happened? Where did that come in? But yeah, that makes a lot more sense. Definitely.
So overall in the episode, any missed opportunities? I had alluded earlier that I felt like Scully kind of completely dismissing reincarnation, considering her Catholicism. I think that could have probably been explored at least a little bit more, and that may have been a missed opportunity. Was there anything else that you guys saw?
I think definitely, I think I spoke about it earlier in terms of the hypnosis scene. I think so much more could have been taken from that, definitely. And I almost wanted to see a little bit of, Michelle on her own, or Michelle kind of coming out of it and going back into it, or if she was just constantly in it. I think she was a really good actress, and it would have been interesting to kind of see her in some of those kind of, I don't know, in between moments, maybe.
I find this interesting to give an answer to without going into the final question of how many axes would you give this episode. But the entire episode to me seems like a really, really bad missed opportunity. And I think, like, watching it, I was thinking, like, even the color palette they decided to use for this episode, I thought was like a missed opportunity because there's so much other, so much more color I think they could have used in this episode, and it's just not there. So gray and bleak and a bit of blue, in the final scene and stuff like that.
As we go through this and discuss more, I am thinking of more like missed opportunities. So, for example, there was a question posed in our discussion about the meds that Michelle was on, the Thorazine, which is an antipsychotic medication. I didn't originally feel like there was a lot to say about that because the doctor was just like, yeah, she's been on this medication for X amount of time. And Mulder says, how has she reacted to that? And they said, it has eliminated a lot of the bizarre behaviors. And that was kind of it. I feel like maybe that should have been something that was addressed a little more. Now that I'm thinking about it, I think that was a missed opportunity.
And I think there's so much of the what could have been explained more. Yes,
absolutely.
I mean,
Um,
that whole idea of, medicating children that don't conform to the standards of behavior that we want from them, not even that we expect, that we as adults want. We want them to comply. We want them to behave like other children. And yeah, maybe these children that we medicate, in quite a sort of relaxed way of, oh, of course we've put them on that, that's what we need, or that's what they need. It's like, actually, if you listen to them and allowed them to express what they were going through fully, however traumatic and horrendous that might appear outwardly, what would come of it, if we actually listened and actually met the needs of those children in a very different way. But that's a
Yeah.
much bigger conversation, I know, but yeah.
Absolutely. But that
Mm.
kind of, makes me think, did they do that with Michelle?
Mm.
Could she verbalize that? Could she explain what was going on? Mom was saying that all these things were happening and she's like, I just want it to be normal.
Yeah.
Where is the line where medication is appropriate?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like you said, that is a whole other conversation that we could probably do hours talking about. But
And that
um,
links briefly to that hypnosis scene, doesn't it? Where immediately where she starts to say they're killing me, the mother's like, no, we're not dealing with that. Like, I'm
oh, that's a
shutting
good
that
point.
down. And it's
Mhm.
like, that's the moment where she's really expressing something very significant, but because it doesn't fit with what the mother wants to hear or believe is appropriate, it's like, no, we're not having that, and that's it. You're fine, you're fine. And it's like, if she's just been murdered in whatever capacity, she's far from fine.
Yeah.
Like, let that come out and deal with it. But yeah, I mean, there's something bigger there as well about the fear of death and the fear of, the dark aspects of humanity. So
Yeah. Did anybody have a favorite scene?
I think the one where the origami hawk is thrown out the window.
That
Yeah.
is really lovely, actually. I mean, I love the fish tank smashing. I'm all into that kind of drama stuff. I think that's fantastic. And like you were alluding to, Dan, the lighting does change there and becomes quite interesting. You get a bit of a slow-mo kind of thing on the go. And yeah, I think that's really well put together. And I think the acting from everyone actually in that final scene is really good and really tight and really quite meaningful. And I think actually it's the first time you see an adult really talking to Michelle, even though it's to Charlie and everything else, like really engaging with her and taking her seriously and acknowledging her power. And there's a lovely kind of release that comes from that, I think. So yeah.
I like that scene as well. Agent Dan, you had mentioned the lighting. The lighting did change there. It was like the light at the end of the tunnel.
Mm.
Am I the only one that felt bad for the fish?
I felt really bad for the fish. Nobody cared. It was like, scoop them up, do it now.
Right. So, like, I wasn't a huge fan of and I understand it's like theatrical, it's dramatic. I felt bad for the fish, but like Agent Bennett said, that is the first time an adult is actually really engaging with Michelle. It's like it finally clicked and finally somebody got it. And then Agent Dan, you had said the lighting, and I didn't actually think of that until you had said that. And the change in the light, and it's like things were becoming brighter again. And then, literally the next scene is the pool is open, the kids are in the pool, it is a bright, sunny day, and it's like, hey, almost like predicting that change.
Yeah, that color match as well from the blue to the blue was nice. And maybe we would like to believe that those fish, which had been through and seen a lot in their little lives, let's face it, they were on that journey too. Maybe they then got to the bigger pool and they got to swim free, and that was
Those
a
fish have
beautiful.
seen some shit.
They really have seen some shit. They know
thought-
much more. We should always listen to the fish.
Regarding the fish, I thought it was interesting that the episode specifically points out that they are saltwater fish, freshwater.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was good writing, I felt, on their part. Saltwater fish tanks, they're not super, super popular in the United States, but there are people that have them. They're not like a rarity here. And it's kind of like a niche market where it's, hey, I really love diving and I'd love to have these fish in my living room because it's a ton of work. But I felt like from a viewer's perspective to think about the writers coming up with that's a really interesting, like, caveat in that storyline. I would never have thought of that. I just, to me, that was like a really cool link there.
But
think
as
it's
well,
a
like
really
they seem to, sorry, they seem to like leap to the conclusion that the saltwater fish, no, the salt water that was found in the body came from that fish tank.
Mm. Yeah, there was some really dodgy pseudo science in that, but
Yeah.
it works in terms of a narrative, right? But like symbolically, it was nice. I mean, they had this whole idea of like a diver and being submerged and then being released, and finally surfacing, the truth coming out, and all that stuff. I thought, yeah, like visually it works, and the fact that the truth just explodes all over the living room was kind of cool as well. So,
Considering the setting is in Buffalo, New York, where else are you going to find salt water?
indeed.
So, I mean, maybe that's why they were like, "Oh, hey, saltwater fish tank." I don't
Yeah.
know. I felt like it was interesting either way.
Mm.
All right, so we are about at the end here. How many X's have you guys given the episode? Who wants to go
So
first?
I'm really torn with this because thematically, I think there's so much to talk about and so much to think about. And I think there's some really clever layering of things. It's far more like police drama and kind of solving the crime style than traditional X-File. And it is a sort of monster of the week, but it doesn't really come close to that. There's a lot of things that needed to be rewritten. And I think the relationship between Mulder and Scully is really inexplicably strained. But there's still a lot to like, and I think there's a lot of interesting layers to it. So I'm going to go for a 6.5.
Okay. Agent Tan?
I'll go for a 3.
Ooh.
I had really bad memories of this episode before I watched it, and I must have had them over years. But I think watching it again was not quite as bad as the memory. But also, I found it interesting that Chris Carter like really sort of like picked up in some things that he said. Although he did admit that he thought it was one of her least successful episodes of the X-Files. I thought the directions was sloppy, but it's one of those episodes that plays a little closer to reality, and I like that about it. There's a nice twist in it about a man marrying the wife of another man he had killed. There were actually some nice effects, just not one of my favorites. I think probably where my opinion differs from like both our statements and what Agent Bennett said was I wasn't really keen on the effects. Like even like the slow mo that you mentioned, I didn't think that was very effective. And I don't know why it's like shown. I thought maybe because it was like the level of technology at that time, visual effects technology, but it's sort of like jumpy instead of like smooth slow mo, and that like stuck out to me. But I didn't think that was very good. But
Okay.
I give it a 3.
All right, we have a 6.5 and a 3, and I am going to go with a 7. I liked the episode. Most of it was acted well. I felt like Michelle did a good job. Convincing characters. Decent storyline. Yeah, there are some things that they missed that they could have elaborated on, but I felt like it was a good storyline. Taking a look at like reviews and what people have said, this episode does get a lot of hate. There are a lot of people that don't like it, and they just said that this is basically a reincarnation of previous episodes in the season. Like, oh, they've already done this. Why are we doing it again? I liked it, so I'm going to go with a 7. So I meant to say this at the beginning, but today is actually the premiere day of the series back in 1993. So September 10th is when the first episode of the X-Files actually aired. So it's kind of cool that fell on a Saturday, and here we are. So
happy X-Files Day.
Yep. Happy series premiere day. So
Woo!
all right, so it is about that time. I'd like to thank the panelists for joining in on the discussion, and we also want to thank our viewers. We hope that you enjoyed the discussion. Let us know what you're thinking in the comments section. Please like and subscribe to the channel so that you can stay up to date and catch up with us on what we are working on. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching, and remember, the truth is still out there.